My son Michael died 13 years ago, drowned in grief. I clung to shadows, to memories, to the faintest digital echo of his existence. But at 1:17 a.m. last night, that echo screamed back. I received a call, impossibly, from his old number. A young man's frightened voice, choked with static and fear. "Mom, I don't have much time. Where am I? It's so dark." It wasn't Michael. My heart knew that instantly, even as it shattered all over again, but the call wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch or a cruel prank pulled from the ether. No, this was calculated. This was the first, deliberate move in a cold, cruel game orchestrated by my living son David's ambitious, ruthless wife, Simone. A game designed to break me, to paint me as confused, incompetent, perhaps even senile. A game designed to seize control of the life, the assets, I had quietly, carefully built. She thought she was targeting a frail, grieving widow, an easy mark. She underestimated the archivist. She underestimated the mother. She underestimated me. Let me lay out the evidence. Let me show you how her scheme unraveled, how her pawn became my witness, and how her ambition led directly to her own downfall. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. First, let me tell you who I really am. Beyond the labels they tried to stick on me. Mom, Martha, the quiet retiree. For nearly 40 years I was Martha Dubois, head archivist at the City Museum. My world was one of meticulous detail, of patient research, of piecing together fragmented histories from dusty boxes and fading documents. I dealt in facts, in evidence, in the quiet, persistent truth that always eventually surfaces. My late husband Robert used to joke that I could find a missing comma in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was that attention to detail, that refusal to accept easy answers that defined me. After Michael's death, officially ruled a tragic accidental drowning during a late-night swim with friends, though nagging inconsistencies always bothered me, and Robert's passing from cancer a few years later, my life contracted. My living son David was grown, building his own life. I retired from the museum, finding solace in the quiet order of my small paid-off bungalow, the same one Robert and I bought decades ago. My life was filled with books, my garden, volunteer work at the local historical society, modest, predictable, exactly how I liked it. Or so David, and especially his wife Simone, believed. They saw the sensible car, the simple clothes, the lack of expensive hobbies. They assumed my archivist's salary, and Robert's modest pension meant I was living comfortably. Perhaps, but certainly not wealthily. They never knew about the portfolio Robert and I had meticulously, quietly built, over 40 years, disciplined saving, shrewd, lucky, investments in early tech stocks, based on research papers I'd archived at the museum. They didn't know that my modest retirement was supplemented by passive income that far exceeded David's salary. I never flaunted it. Wealth, to me, wasn't a performance. It was security, freedom, privacy. Simone, however, operated on a different frequency. She was all performance. Ambitious, beautiful, relentlessly focused on acquiring the trappings of success. She came from a family whose own wealth, I suspected, was built on foundations slightly less solid, perhaps even less scrupulous than they projected. Something involving commercial real estate development in newly gentrifying, historically neglected areas like the old shipyard district. She married my David, who is fundamentally decent but undeniably weak-willed and easily dazzled, and immediately began steering their lives towards her own aspirational goals. Her attitude towards me shifted subtly after Robert died and I retired. She saw me less as David's mother and more as an unmanaged asset, or perhaps, a liability. My quiet independence, my ownership of a house in a neighborhood she eyed for its investment potential, seemed to irritate her. Her polite inquiries about my future plans began to feel less like concern and more like probing. "Mom, Martha," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "you shouldn't have to worry about managing all this by yourself. The house upkeep, the bills, investments, it's so complicated these days." David and I were thinking, maybe it's time we helped you simplify things. Take some of that burden off your shoulders. I always politely declined, asserting my competence, guarding my independence. But her persistence felt predatory. She saw a naive old woman, sitting on potentially valuable assets, ripe for management. My archivist's instinct, trained to detect hidden motives in historical documents, Sensed a modern-day plot unfolding under my own roof. And then came the impossible call. The call from Michael's number. The call that reeked of Simone's particular brand of manipulative cruelty. The game, I realized with a chill, had begun. The phone ringing at 1:17 a.m. was the first violation. The shrill alien sound shattered the deep comforting silence of my small house, jolting me instantly from sleep into a state of heart-pounding disoriented panic. My bedside clock glowed accusingly in the darkness. Who would call at this hour? An emergency, David? I fumbled for my reading glasses on the nightstand, my hand clumsy with sleep and sudden fear. I grabbed my phone, the screen blindingly bright, and then I saw it. The caller ID that stopped my breath, that made the blood freeze in my veins. Michael Dubois Mobile. Impossible. Utterly, fundamentally impossible. Michael was gone. 13 years. His phone, cracked and water damaged, sat in a box in my closet. The number, I'd kept it active. Yes. Transferred to a cheap burner phone I never used, paying the $10 a month like a quiet, irrational offering to his memory. But the burner phone's battery had been dead for years. No one could call from that number. Yet, it was ringing, insistent, demanding. Each pulse of light on the screen felt like a physical blow. A cruel prank? A hacker manipulating caller ID? My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, anything to dispel the icy tendrils of supernatural dread creeping up my spine. My hand trembled violently as I finally instinctively swiped the screen. Maybe it was the police? News? An accident involving David? Hello? My voice was a dry, rasping whisper, unrecognizable. Static crackled on the line, thick and heavy like listening through layers of wet wool. Then through the interference, a voice, young male, and utterly, completely terrified. Mom. The word was hesitant, choked, laced with an almost unbearable vulnerability that instantly bypassed my logic and hit me straight in the maternal core.
Mom.
Is that you? It wasn't Michael's voice. I knew that instantly. Similar timbre, maybe, the same underlying youthful cadence. But this voice was thinner, higher pitched with panic, frayed at the edges with a terror my bold, sometimes reckless but never truly fearful son had never possessed. My own voice caught, confusion warred with a sudden fierce protective instinct. Who was this boy? Why did he sound like he was in such terrible trouble? Who is this? I managed, my voice sharper than I intended. This isn't. Who are you? Mom, please. The voice broke again, dissolving into something close to a sob. I don't have much time. I don't know where I am. The panic escalated rapidly, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush, punctuated by ragged breaths. It's so dark. I can't see anything. It's cold. Really cold. My heart felt like it was physically clenching in my chest. This wasn't a prank. The fear in that voice was too raw, too real. This was someone in genuine immediate distress. Someone who for some reason believed they were talking to their mother. Someone calling inexplicably from my dead son's number. Listen to me, I said, trying to inject calm authority into my voice. The old archivist taking over, trying to gather data amidst the chaos. Tell me your name. Where do you think you are? There was a pause, a shaky intake of breath. It's Jordan, Mom. Don't you recognize me? Jordan? The name meant nothing. Utterly unfamiliar. Mom, please. You have to help me. I think maybe I hit my head. Everything's fuzzy. I woke up here. It smells weird, really strong. Like old fish, or chemicals. And rust? He coughed then. A deep, wet, rattling sound that sent a fresh wave of ice water through my veins. It sounded bad. Jordan, try to focus, I urged, my mind racing. Fish? Chemicals? Rust? Where would smell like that? What else do you see? Here? Nothing. It's pitch black, he whimpered. Wait. I hear water, like dripping, and something banging, metal maybe? Way off? Oh God, Mom, where am I? What happened? Please tell me where I am. His voice was rising again, dissolving into pure panic. And then he mentioned it. The detail that snagged sharp and cold in my memory. The detail I now suspected was deliberately planted. It feels damp, like near the water. The old shipyard, Warehouse 7. Does that mean anything? The old shipyard, Warehouse 7. My blood ran cold. Simone's family, their questionable real estate dealings. They owned property down there. Dilapidated warehouses they were lobbying the city to rezone. Warehouse 7. The number sounded vaguely, disturbingly familiar from some legal document Simone had once carelessly left lying around their house. Something about property taxes or zoning applications. Before I could ask another question, before I could try to process the horrifying implication, the static on the line intensified, erupting in a sudden, harsh burst of white noise that made me flinch. Jordan's voice was swallowed whole. Then silence. Utter, complete, terrifying silence. The call had cut out. Dead. I stared at my phone, the screen now dark, reflecting only my own wide, horrified eyes. The silence in my small apartment returned. But it was different now. It was heavy, suffocating, charged with the echo of that terrified voice, the impossible number, the planted clue, the chilling connection to Simone's family. Michael's ghost, the quiet companion of my grief, had suddenly inexplicably become tangled up with a stranger's desperate plea in the dark, in a place linked to my ambitious, ruthless daughter-in-law. This wasn't a random tragedy. This wasn't a prank. This felt orchestrated. This felt deliberate. And the cold, sickening realization began to dawn. The game Simone had been playing, the game to gain control, had just turned potentially deadly, and I somehow was now in the middle of it. My first instinct, after the immediate wave of shock and terror subsided slightly, allowing rational thought to resurface, was not just fear but a cold, sharp anger. If this was Simone, if she had truly stooped so low as to use Michael's memory, his number, to frighten me, the cruelty was almost inconceivable. But my second instinct, honed by years of dealing with manipulative tactics, was caution. I couldn't accuse her directly. Not yet. I had no proof, only suspicion, a gut feeling, however strong. Accusation without evidence would only make me look hysterical, paranoid, exactly the image she likely wanted to cultivate. No, I needed to play her game. I needed to see how she would react. So I called David. My son. My weak, easily influenced, but fundamentally decent son. Surely he wouldn't be involved in something this monstrous. Perhaps Simone was acting alone. Perhaps David, if confronted with the horror of the call, would finally see his wife for who she truly was. I dialed his number around 7 a.m., giving them time to be awake, but still catching them before the full armor of their day was donned. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy but wary. "Mom, everything okay? It's early." "David," I began, deliberately letting my voice tremble, injecting the genuine shock and fear I still felt, but amplifying it slightly for effect. "Something terrible happened last night. I got a phone call, around 1:15. "A phone call from who?" His voice sharpened slightly with impatience, not concern. "David, it was from Michael's number." I let the impossible statement hang in the air. There was a distinct pause, longer than natural surprise would warrant. A pause that felt calculated. Then, instead of the shocked disbelief or heartbroken confusion I might have expected, his voice took on a wary, almost guarded tone that immediately set my internal alarms ringing. "Michael's number? Mom, that's impossible. That number hasn't been active in over a decade. You must be mistaken. Maybe you misread the caller ID in the dark." "No, David, I'm absolutely sure," I insisted, playing the part of the distraught, confused mother perfectly. It came up clear as day. "Michael Dubois, mobile, and there was a boy on the line. He said his name was Jordan. He sounded terrified, like he was hurt, lost somewhere near the old shipyard, maybe warehouse 7. He kept calling me Mom." Whoa. Slow down," David interrupted quickly, his voice shifting now, becoming smoother, more placating. Dangerously placating. "Mom, listen to me very carefully. Are you sure you were fully awake? Maybe it was just a vivid nightmare? You know you've been under so much stress lately. With Dad gone, retiring, grief can do strange things to the mind. Gaslighting. Textbook. Blame the victim. Question her sanity. Minimize the event." My suspicion hardened into near certainty. He wasn't just surprised, he sounded like he was reading from a script. "David, I was wide awake," I snapped, allowing a flash of genuine anger to cut through the performance of fragility. The call was real. The boy was real. He kept calling me Mom. And he mentioned warehouse 7. Okay, Mom. Calm down, please." He soothed, his voice dripping with false patience, the kind one uses on a difficult child or a senile relative. "Look, Simone is awake now too. She heard me talking, she's worried about you. I heard muffled whispering in the background, Simone's voice low, urgent, instructing. Then David came back on the line, his tone now even more reassuring, even more transparently artificial. Honey, he said, the endearment feeling clumsy, unnatural on his tongue. Simone thinks, and honestly I have to agree with her, that it was probably just a horrible, cruel prank call. Someone must have found your number online, maybe knew about Michael somehow. It's amazing what creeps can dig up, and decided to play a really sick joke using one of those spoofing apps to fake Michael's caller ID. Those things are apparently really easy to get now. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. But it happens all the time. Simone's theory. Delivered flawlessly through David, quick, plausible. Designed to dismiss, to invalidate, to shut down any further investigation before it even began. But he sounded so genuinely scared. I persisted, playing my role, needing to see how far they would push the denial. He mentioned Warehouse 7, down by the shipyard. Warehouse 7? David repeated, perhaps a fraction of a second too quickly, a flash of recognition he immediately tried to cover. Down by the shipyard? Mom, that whole area is completely derelict. Scheduled for demolition. It's probably just a coincidence, something he saw on an old sign or heard somewhere. Look, honestly, the best thing you can do right now is just try to forget about it. Please, don't dwell on it. Getting yourself all worked up over some sick prankster won't help anything. We don't want you getting sick with worry. We don't want you getting sick with worry, or perhaps we don't want you asking inconvenient questions about our family's potentially shady business dealings in that exact location. Shouldn't I at least call the police? I asked, deliberately testing him, watching for his reaction, needing the final piece of confirmation. The police? David scoffed, the sound sharp, almost panicked, quickly softened with a gentle laugh. Oh, Mom, please. What would you even tell them? That you got a crank call late at night from a recycled number, possibly spoofed. They won't do anything, honey. They'll think, well, honestly, they'll probably think you're overwrought, maybe a little confused. It'll just upset you even more. Dredge up all the painful memories about Michael again for no reason. Trust me on this, Mom. The absolute best thing, the only thing to do is to just let it go. Put it completely out of your mind. Okay? Promise me you'll do that. His insistence was revealing. Look, he added quickly. Before I could argue, why don't Simone and I come over later this morning? We'll bring some coffee, some pastries from that fancy place you like. We can sit and chat. Make sure you're okay. How does that sound? A checkup. Damage control. Make sure the victim was properly sedated. Okay, David, I whispered, injecting a final note of weary defeat. If you think that's best. It is, Mom. Definitely. We'll see you around 10. We love you. He hung up quickly, decisively. I sat there, phone in hand, the silence of the room pressing in on me like a physical weight. Their reaction wasn't just dismissive. It was perfectly terrifyingly coordinated, rehearsed. Their immediate leap to the prank call spoofed number explanation. Before I'd even mentioned the number might be recycled. The subtle, insidious gaslighting about my stress levels, my grief, my perception of reality. The specific, almost frantic discouragement from involving the police. David's oddly quick recognition then dismissal of Warehouse 7. It all painted a horrifyingly clear picture. They weren't just uninvolved bystanders trying to calm an upset mother. They were active participants, reading from a pre-written script, executing a plan. They weren't concerned about Jordan. They weren't concerned about the impossible call potentially linked to Michael's death. They were concerned solely and utterly about me. About my reaction, about managing me, about ensuring I dismissed the incident, questioned my own sanity and remained passive. The cold hard certainty settled in my gut like a block of ice. This wasn't just connected to them, this was them, or rather it was Simone, with David acting as her weak, compliant mouthpiece. The call, the terrifying manipulative call using my dead son's number, wasn't just a random act of cruelty tossed into my life. It was a message, a warning. And most chillingly, the first calculated move in a much larger, much more sinister game, a game designed to undermine my credibility, paint me as unstable, perhaps even delusional, and ultimately, clear the path for them to seize control of the assets they believed I possessed, but was too naive, too incompetent, too old to manage properly. My grief, my deepest vulnerability, wasn't just being ignored, it was being actively, consciously weaponized against me by my own family. The war had begun without my knowledge. Now it was time for me to fight back. Despite David and Simone's strenuous, almost suspiciously insistent discouragement, my sense of civic duty, ingrained from a lifetime of following rules and procedures, and perhaps more accurately, my archivist's ingrained need for thorough documentation and the establishment of an official record, compelled me to follow the proper channels. Even if the police and the phone company could offer no immediate help or answers, I needed to log the event formally. I needed to document the impossible call, the number, the time, the details Jordan provided within the official systems. If this was, as I now firmly suspected, part of a larger, deliberate scheme orchestrated by Simone, that official police report, however dismissive, might prove crucial later. It established a timeline. It documented my initial rational reaction. It created a piece of evidence that couldn't be easily dismissed as hysteria or delusion later on. So later that morning, after David and Simone had paid their brief, performative wellness check visit, arriving with lukewarm coffee in expensive paper cups from a trendy downtown barista, showering me with suffocating waves of false sympathy, "Poor mom, you look exhausted," and repeating their warnings not to dwell on the upsetting crank call, "It's what those sick people want, mom." I waited until they left, took a deep steadying breath, and made the calls myself. First the police non-emergency line again. This time, thankfully, I reached a different operator. A woman with a calm, professional and blessedly less condescending voice named Officer Davis. I recounted the story again, carefully, factually, keeping my voice steady, deliberately suppressing the tremor of grief and anger that still vibrated beneath the surface. I emphasized the specific verifiable details, the exact time of the call, 1:17 a.m., the caller ID displaying my deceased son's registered number, Michael Dubois, mobile, the caller identifying himself as Jordan, his apparent state of injury and disorientation, his chillingly specific location clue, Warehouse 7 near the old shipyard, mentioning smells of salt water and rust, hearing foghorns. I provided the information report number the operator the night before had dismissively given me, asking for my updated statement to be formally added to that record. Officer Davis listened patiently, asking clarifying questions, typing methodically in the background. Unlike her colleague the previous night, she didn't immediately jump to the prank call conclusion. "Okay, Miss Dubois," she said, her tone serious and professional. "Thank you for providing those details. I've updated the information log with your full statement." She paused, and I held my breath, hoping for a sign of action. "Now," she continued, her voice shifting slightly, becoming more cautious, managing expectations, "I need to be upfront with you. As the previous operator likely explained, tracing a call like this, especially one that disconnected quickly and potentially involved a spoofed or recycled number, is extremely difficult without more concrete information. An active missing person report filed for Jordan, a witness, evidence of forced entry or struggle at the alleged location. The mention of Warehouse 7 is helpful, but that district has multiple abandoned structures, without a specific address or unit number. Sending officers to conduct a blind search based solely on a potentially unreliable call from early this morning is problematic from a resource allocation standpoint. I felt the familiar surge of helpless frustration, but I kept my voice calm. "I understand, officer." But the fear in his voice, it felt undeniably real. And the use of my son's number. "It's certainly a disturbing and unusual situation, Miss Dubois," Officer Davis conceded, her voice softening with a hint of genuine sympathy. "And I've flagged the report for follow-up should any related missing persons reports come in matching the name Jordan or the circumstances you described. I've also noted the connection to your son's old number, though frankly the recycled number scenario remains the most statistically probable explanation. What I can recommend," she added, her tone becoming slightly more encouraging, "is that you contact your phone service provider again. While they are bound by privacy laws, sometimes escalating the call to a supervisor or a fraud department, and emphasizing the potential endangerment aspect, and your police report number, might yield slightly more information, perhaps about the number's recent activity status, even if they can't reveal subscriber details." It wasn't much, but it was more than the flat dismissal I'd received the night before. Officer Davis at least seemed to acknowledge the possibility that something real had occurred. I thanked her for her time, carefully noted her name and badge number, and ended the call. Documented, log, a small, perhaps insignificant step, but a necessary one. Next, the phone company again. Another descent into the automated hell of the customer service line. Another long orbit through Vivaldi's Hold Music Nebula. Another weary-sounding representative. This one, a man named Carlos. I repeated my story for the third time, this time incorporating Officer Davis's suggestions. I emphasized the police report number. I stressed the potential endangerment of the caller, Jordan. I specifically asked to be escalated to a supervisor or the fraud department, citing the unusual and distressing circumstances involving my deceased son's number. Carlos listened, perhaps slightly more attentively than Kevin had the day before, likely due to the mention of the police report. He placed me on hold for several minutes. When he returned, his voice was apologetic but firm. "Ms. Dubois," he began, "I have spoken with my supervisor and reviewed the account notes regarding your call yesterday. Unfortunately, our position remains the same. The number in question was deactivated 13 years ago and reassigned into the general pool over a decade ago. Due to strict federal CP&I privacy regulations, we absolutely cannot disclose any information regarding the current subscriber, their location, account status, or call history without a legally binding court order, such as a subpoena or warrant, obtained by law enforcement." He paused, then added, perhaps sensing my profound disappointment, "Even our fraud department requires verifiable evidence of illegal activity directly linked to the account, such as identity theft or unauthorized charges, to initiate an internal investigation that might override some privacy protocols. A disturbing call, even one involving a potentially spoofed number, unfortunately doesn't meet that threshold on its own." Another dead end. The official channels had confirmed Simone and David's narrative. Recycled number, probable prank. Nothing officially actionable. Case effectively closed. Anyone else, any rational person perhaps, might have given up at that point, accepted the official story, believed the persistent gaslighting from their own family, begun to doubt their own senses, their own memory, their own intuition, started to wonder if perhaps they were overwrought, confused, maybe even losing their grip. But I wasn't anyone else. I was an archivist, and my entire career, my entire way of thinking, was built on the fundamental premise that official narratives are often incomplete, sometimes deliberately misleading, and frequently fail to capture the messy, complex, often hidden truths of human experience. The real story, I knew, often lies buried in the footnotes, hidden in the margins, whispered in the silences, waiting for someone persistent enough, meticulous enough, and perhaps suspicious enough to dig it out. The official doors were closed, locked tight by bureaucracy and privacy laws. Fine. It was time to start looking for the unofficial ones. The back channels, the hidden pathways. My suspicion, small and uncertain at first, then hardening into conviction, was now a cold, burning certainty driving me forward. Simone was involved. The call was deliberate, and I was going to find out precisely how, and why. My investigation was just beginning. I tried for the remainder of that day and the next to maintain an outward appearance of calm acceptance. I played the part of the slightly shaken but ultimately reassured mother for David and Simone, when they called again, feigning gratitude for their sensible advice about not involving the police further. I forced myself to engage in mundane household routines, dusting furniture that wasn't mine, arranging flowers I hadn't chosen, trying to project an aura of quiet, grandmotherly normalcy. But beneath the surface, my mind was anything but calm. It was working relentlessly, obsessively, turning over the fragmented pieces of the puzzle, searching for a connection, a pattern, a starting point for my own, unofficial investigation. The police were a dead end. The phone company was a brick wall. David and Simone were actively obstructing, gaslighting. That left only the call itself. The details Jordan had provided in his panic. Dark, cold, smell of old fish, chemicals, rust, sound of dripping water, banging metal, foghorns. A perfect sensory description of a derelict industrial waterfront building. Plausible. Michael's number. The inexplicable, deeply disturbing core of the mystery. Why? How? Warehouse 7. Old shipyard. The specific concrete clue. The potential key. The detail David had recognized, then quickly dismissed. The detail that resonated with Simone's family business. That phrase, Warehouse 7, kept echoing in my mind, refusing to be silenced, refusing to be dismissed as coincidence or delirium. It felt deliberate, planted. Why would Simone, or whoever orchestrated this, choose that specific location? Was it just a random warehouse her family happened to own? Or was there something specific about that building, something they wanted to associate with me, with my potential confusion or distress? My archivist's mind, trained to follow the faintest trails of association, began to work on the puzzle from a different angle. Forget Jordan for a moment. Forget the mechanics of the call. Focus on the why. Why this particular form of psychological torture? Why use Michael's number specifically? The obvious answer was cruelty. To exploit my deepest grief, my greatest vulnerability, to maximize the emotional impact, to make me doubt my own stability. It was monstrously cruel, and certainly fit with the casual callousness I'd witnessed from David and Simone. It fit with Simone's ruthlessness. But was it just cruelty? Or was there a strategic purpose behind invoking Michael's ghost? I thought back to Michael's death. Officially, an accidental drowning, but those nagging inconsistencies, the ones I had buried for 13 years, had Simone somehow learned about them? Did she know something about Michael's death that I didn't? Was she using his number not just to scare me, but to subtly hint at something darker, something unresolved, something that might make me seem even more unstable if I started talking about old officially closed cases? Was she trying to preemptively discredit me, painting me as a grieving mother obsessed with conspiracy theories? Should I ever start asking difficult questions about her family's business dealings? The thought was chilling. It implied a level of premeditation, of cold-blooded, long-game strategy that was truly terrifying. And Warehouse 7. Why that specific location? I knew Simone's family owned property in the Shipyard District. Was Warehouse 7 significant? Had something happened there recently? Something they needed to cover up? An accident? Illegal activity? My suspicion, which had initially focused on Simone's desire to gain control of my finances, now broadened, darkened. Was this just about my modest house and savings? Or was it about something bigger? Was she trying to silence me, not just control me? Was the phone call a warning shot? A terrifying message to back off from something I didn't even know I was close to discovering? What had Michael stumbled into 13 years ago? What had Jordan stumbled into now? And how were Simone and her family connected to both? The questions multiplied, spiraling outwards, each one colder, more ominous than the last. The simple explanation, Simone wants my money, felt suddenly inadequate. This felt bigger, more dangerous. My quiet retirement, my carefully constructed peace, was irrevocably shattered. I was no longer just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law and a weak son. I felt like I had inadvertently stumbled onto the edge of something dark, something hidden in the decaying heart of the old shipyard, something that had already claimed one life, maybe Michael's, and was now threatening another. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. This was about finding the truth. For Michael, for Jordan, and for my own sanity. The archivist needed more data, and the mother needed justice. Simone, sensing perhaps that the initial shock of the impossible phone call hadn't completely destabilized me as she'd hoped, that I wasn't dissolving into a puddle of grief-stricken confusion, subtly but unmistakably escalated her campaign over the next few days. Her focus shifted, becoming sharper, more direct. She moved from vague insinuations about my stress levels to insidious targeted assaults on my perceived competence, clearly building a case, piece by manufactured piece, for my inability to manage my own affairs. It started with small, easily deniable incidents, designed perhaps to plant seeds of doubt in my own mind, to make me question my own memory and judgment, or perhaps just to create a pattern of evidence she could later present to David, or worse, to a lawyer or a doctor. My mail, which I always collected promptly from the mailbox at the curb each afternoon and sorted meticulously on the small table in the foyer, started appearing in odd, illogical places. One day I found a stack of important-looking envelopes, bills, bank statements tucked carelessly under a cushion on the living room sofa, as if forgotten. Another day, a crucial property tax notice, which I knew I had placed on the foyer table, was discovered by Simone. Days later, mixed in with a pile of junk mail destined for the recycling bin. When I questioned it, expressing my certainty that I hadn't put it there, Simone feigned innocent, wide-eyed confusion. "Oh, Mom, Martha, are you sure?" she'd asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "You've seemed a little preoccupied lately. Maybe you just misplaced it. It happens to all of us." Forgetful. The word was dropped casually, lightly, but the intent behind it was sharp as a poisoned dart. Then came the concerted attack on my financial competence. I paid all my bills meticulously online, using a secure two-factor authentication system I had set up years ago. A system I navigated with the ease of long practice. Suddenly, Simone started expressing deep concern about my ability to manage this supposedly complex task. "Mom, I noticed you got an overdue email alert from the electric company this morning. She mentioned one morning, holding up her phone with a worried frown. The alert was likely fabricated or triggered by her deliberately interfering with my online account access. Are you absolutely positive you remembered to schedule that payment online? Sometimes those automatic payment systems can be so tricky they don't always go through. Maybe it would be safer if I started helping you with that. Just took a look at your accounts each month. Make sure everything is being paid on time. I'd hate for you to have any services cut off. It would give me peace of mind. She was offering help that was in reality a blatant attempt to gain access to my account numbers, my passwords, the keys to my financial kingdom, under the guise of responsible daughterly concern. My house keys, which I always, without fail, kept in a small ceramic dish on my bedside table, mysteriously vanished one afternoon while I was taking a nap. I searched my room frantically, methodically, a genuine cold panic beginning to rise in my chest despite my underlying suspicions. After nearly an hour of fruitless, increasingly desperate searching, Simone found them, dangling inexplicably from the hook on the back of the pantry door downstairs. "Oh, Mom, Martha, look what I found," she chirped, holding them up with a triumphant, almost theatrical smile. "Silly you must have left them here when you were getting some crackers last night. See, we all get a little forgetful sometimes." The implication was crystal clear, delivered with a condescending pat on my arm. "You're losing it. You can't even keep track of your own keys anymore. You're becoming incompetent. You need supervision." She began having loud, pointed conversations with David, always ensuring I was just within earshot, her voice laced with exaggerated performative worry that sounded utterly false to my ears, but which David, in his willful blindness, seemed to accept at face value. "Honey," she'd sigh, loud enough for me to hear clearly from my position reading in the living room. "I'm really getting worried about your mom. Seriously. She seems so scattered lately, misplacing important mail, forgetting conversations we just had. Maybe that horrible phone call really did upset her more than we initially thought. Maybe the stress of living alone, managing everything by herself, is finally getting to be too much for her to handle." She was building the narrative, brick by insidious brick, for David, for herself, perhaps even for future legal battles. "Mom is confused. Mom is forgetful. Mom is overwhelmed. Mom needs help. Our control." The final, most audacious move, the one that confirmed the endgame beyond any doubt, came a few days later. Simone approached me while I was quietly reading in the garden, her face arranged in an expression of utmost seriousness and loving concern. She carried a thick sheaf of complicated-looking legal documents and sat down beside me on the bench, her demeanor radiating gentle, persuasive gravity. "Mom, Martha," she began, her voice soft, intimate, almost conspiratorial, "David and I were talking to our family lawyer yesterday, just about some routine estate planning stuff for us and the kids. You know, being responsible adults." She gave a small self-deprecating laugh that sounded utterly hollow. "And our situation got him thinking about you, about making sure you're protected, that your wishes are respected, no matter what happens in the future." She patted the documents in her lap. "So," he suggested, "just as a standard precaution, really nothing urgent, that maybe you should consider assigning someone power of attorney? Just for your finances and maybe your healthcare decisions down the line. You know, in case anything unexpected ever happens, God forbid, or if things just get too complicated or burdensome for you to manage all by yourself someday. It would take such a weight off your shoulders, Mom, knowing that David and I could step in seamlessly, handle everything exactly as you'd want without any legal fuss or delay." She pulled out the top document, the thick, intimidatingly worded durable power of attorney, and placed it gently on the bench between us, along with an expensive-looking, gold-plated fountain pen she produced from her designer handbag. "It's just a standard form, really quite simple," she added casually, dismissively, "mostly boilerplate. I can walk you through it right now, help you fill out the relevant sections. It would only take a minute or two, then we could get it notarized later this week. Just peace of mind for everyone." There it was, laid out bare. The end game. The power of attorney. The legal key that would unlock my carefully guarded finances, my property, my healthcare decisions, my entire independent life, and hand complete, irrevocable control over to her, to Simone, the woman who had orchestrated a terrifying phone call using my dead son's number and was now actively trying to convince me, and everyone else, that I was losing my mind. The phone call, the gaslighting, the manufactured incidents of forgetfulness, the performance of loving concern, it had all been meticulously, ruthlessly leading to this single moment. The moment she believed she had sufficiently undermined my confidence, established my perceived incompetence, and created a situation where signing these papers would seem like the only logical, sensible, even grateful option for a frail, confused, burdensome old woman. I looked down at the documents, at the dense paragraphs of legal text designed to obfuscate rather than clarify. I looked up at her eager, predatory smile, the anticipation glittering brightly, avariciously in her eyes. She thought she had me. She thought she had won. And I felt a surge, not of fear but of cold, clear, unadulterated, righteous fury strengthening my resolve, sharpening my focus. She hadn't just underestimated my intelligence. She had fundamentally misjudged my character, my resilience, my deep unwavering refusal to be erased, to be controlled, to be victimized. The archivist, the principal, the grieving mother, all the parts of me coalesced into one single point of unyielding resistance. I pushed the power of attorney documents gently but firmly back towards Simone, letting my hand linger on the thick paper for just a moment, a silent physical rejection of her entire premise. "Thank you for your concern, Simone," I said, my voice quiet but carrying a new firm undertone that made her eager smile falter slightly. "And thank Miss Davenport." I deliberately used the name of the supposed advisor she'd mentioned, letting her know I remembered that detail for drafting these. "But I assure you I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." I paused, meeting her gaze directly, letting her see the flicker of something other than confusion or frailty in my eyes. "And," I added, delivering the counter-move with deliberate calm, "I have already made all the necessary legal arrangements regarding my estate and future care with my own attorney, years ago. Everything is quite securely in order." The smile froze completely on Simone's face. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, the mask of loving concern slipping just enough for me to see the flash of frustrated ambition, of thwarted calculation beneath. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. The compliant, confused, grateful victim had just refused to sign, had just asserted her competence, had just revealed the existence of her own legal counsel. "Oh," she said, her voice suddenly losing all its warmth, becoming flat, cool, clipped. "Well, that's good to know, just an idea of course. For your convenience." She gathered the documents quickly, perhaps a little too quickly, her movements suddenly jerky, betraying her inner turmoil. "Let me know if you ever change your mind, the offer stands." She practically fled from the garden then, retreating back into the house, her composure visibly ruffled, her mask significantly askew. The battle lines were now clearly, irrevocably drawn. She knew I suspected something, knew I wasn't the easy mark she'd assumed. I knew she was actively, ruthlessly plotting against me. The subtle manipulations, the passive-aggressive tactics were likely over. The next phase of her campaign, I suspected, would be more direct, more aggressive, perhaps even more dangerous, and I needed to be ready. My own investigation, my own counteroffensive, needed to move from suspicion and circumstantial evidence to concrete, undeniable proof. That evening the archivist truly went to war. My quiet bungalow became an intelligence hub. My laptop became my weapon, my target, Simone Dubois, née Devereaux, and the entire shadowy structure of the Devereaux Corporation. I bypassed the superficial layers of their corporate website, the glossy photos of completed projects and smiling executives. I dove deep into the digital trenches, public records databases, county clerk filings, archived news reports, business license registries, even obscure online forums discussing urban development and local politics. I used advanced search techniques honed over decades of tracking down elusive historical facts, following faint digital breadcrumbs, cross-referencing names, dates, addresses, subsidiary LLCs. My focus remained on Warehouse 7 and the surrounding shipyard district. I meticulously reconstructed the Devereaux Corporation's acquisition history in that area, tracing the complex web of shell companies and straw buyers they likely used to obscure their ownership and consolidate parcels of land, quietly, often at below-market prices, likely exploiting vulnerable owners. I searched for any official records related to Warehouse 7 itself, building permits, inspection reports, violation notices, and I found something interesting. A series of recent expedited permits granted for asbestos abatement and pre-demolition structural integrity testing, but also, nested deeper in the city's environmental database, a much older violation notice from nearly 15 years ago citing improper storage and suspected dumping of hazardous industrial chemicals on the Pier 12 site, including Warehouse 7. The violation had been issued to the previous owner, a now defunct shipping company, and seemingly never fully remediated. The Devereaux Corp's recent permits made no mention of this prior contamination. Were they trying to cover it up? Was the abatement perhaps less about removing asbestos and more about quietly disposing of illegally dumped toxic waste before the official city redevelopment project began, potentially saving them millions in mandated cleanup costs? It was a plausible and deeply illegal scenario. Now, how did Jordan fit into this? And the call from Michael's number? I shifted my search looking for connections between the Devereaux Corporation, Warehouse 7 and the name Jordan Miller, which the hospital nurse had eventually confirmed. I searched employee databases, both current and former, contractor lists, even security personnel logs for the shipyard properties. Nothing. Then I broadened the search again, looking for any connection between the Devereaux and known low-level criminal elements or security firms known for operating in legal gray areas. And I found a faint but potentially significant link. Simone's older brother Robert Devereaux, the registered agent for the Warehouse 7 LLC, had served on a charity board alongside the owner of a notorious private security firm called Apex Solutions. Apex was known for its aggressive tactics, its ex-military personnel, and its willingness to handle sensitive corporate security matters, including, according to some online rumors and unverified reports, union busting, intimidation of activists, and discreet site-clearing operations. Could Apex be involved? Could Jordan Miller be one of their low-level operatives, hired to perform some illicit task at Warehouse 7, perhaps related to the hazardous waste cover-up? Had he been injured during this task? And had Simone, wanting to simultaneously silence a potential whistleblower and create leverage against me, decided to kill two birds with one stone? Instruct Apex to handle the Jordan problem, perhaps hold him somewhere temporarily, and force him to make that terrifying call to me using Michael's number, supplied by her. It was a complex, horrifying, multi-layered theory. But it fit all the known facts. The Devereaux ownership of Warehouse 7, the history of environmental violations, the recent permits, the timing of Jordan's call and his injuries, the calculated cruelty of using Michael's number, Simone's escalating campaign against my competence, the connection, however tenuous, to a ruthless security firm like Apex. The archivist in me had assembled the fragments, constructed a plausible, internally consistent hypothesis based on the available evidence. The next step was crucial, finding the definitive proof, the smoking gun. I needed to confirm Jordan's role, his connection, willing or unwilling, to Apex and the Devereaux, and I suspected, with a growing sense of cold dread, that the answers lay hidden somewhere in the cold, damp, dangerous shadows of Warehouse 7, or perhaps now in the sterile silence of Jordan Miller's hospital room. My hypothesis felt chillingly plausible, but it remained just that, a theory built on circumstantial evidence and informed intuition. I needed something concrete, something undeniable to connect Simone directly to the orchestrated phone call and to Jordan Miller's plight. Proving Devereaux Corp owned the warehouse and had a history of shady dealings was one thing. Proving Simone deliberately weaponized my grief using a hired operative was another, far more difficult task. My first thought was Jordan himself. He was the key. If I could speak to him, gain his trust, perhaps offer him protection in exchange for the truth. But visiting him again at the hospital felt too risky now. Simone, alerted by my refusal to sign the POA, would be watching me. She might even have someone monitoring visitors to John Doe Sun 27B. Approaching Jordan directly could compromise his safety and my own. No, I needed a different approach, less direct, more archival. If Simone had orchestrated this, especially if she involved a firm like Apex Solutions, there might be a digital trail, however faint, financial records, communication logs, something she in her arrogance might have overlooked. Accessing her personal accounts was impossible, illegal, but perhaps there were other avenues. I focused my research again on Apex Solutions, the security firm linked to Simone's brother. Their official website was bland corporate boilerplate, risk management, asset protection, executive security, but digging deeper into online forums, news archives focusing on corporate malfeasance, even leaked documents from activist groups, I began to piece together a darker picture. Apex had a reputation for intimidation, for making problems disappear. They often employed ex-cons, desperate individuals willing to do dirty work for cash, no questions asked. Was Jordan one of them? I searched for any connection between Apex Solutions and Jordan Miller. Employee records were likely sealed tight, but perhaps there was a public record connection. Minor arrests? Court appearances where Apex lawyers might have represented him. I spent hours cross-referencing names, dates, locations. And then, I found it. Not a direct link to Apex, but something almost as good. A small claims court record from 6 months prior. Plaintiff Jordan T. Miller. Defendant, a Devereaux Corporation subsidiary, one different from the Warehouse 7 LLC, but clearly linked. Nature of claim: unpaid wages for temporary site security services rendered at a different Devereaux property also near the shipyard. The claim had been dismissed, likely settled out of court quickly and quietly to avoid attention. This was huge. It established a prior relationship. Jordan Miller wasn't just some random kid found near their property. He had worked for them before in a capacity related to site security, and he had felt cheated by them, enough to take them to court. This made him both a known quantity and potentially vulnerable to pressure or coercion. He was exactly the kind of disposable pawn a company like Apex, working on behalf of a client like the Devereaux, might use for a risky off-the-books operation. Now, the phone. Michael's number. How did they get that specific number onto a burner phone for Jordan to use? My mind went back 13 years to the aftermath of Michael's death. The police investigation, the return of his belongings. Had Simone, even back then, somehow accessed his phone records? Or more likely, had David, in his grief, shared old family phone bills or account details with her, information she had quietly filed away for potential future use? The thought was sickening, but plausible given her manipulative nature. She collected information, hoarded potential leverage. Michael's old number, linked to my deepest pain, would have been a particularly potent piece of data to keep in reserve. The pieces were falling into place, forming a coherent, deeply disturbing mosaic. Simone, wanting control of my assets and needing to neutralize me as an obstacle. Perhaps I knew, subconsciously, more about her family's questionable business practices than she realized. Devised a plan. Leverage her family's connection to Apex. Hire a known, disgruntled former contractor, Jordan Miller. Provide him with a burner phone programmed with Michael's number. Instruct him to make a terrifying, disorienting call from Warehouse 7, perhaps while he was performing some other illicit task there related to the toxic waste cover-up. The goal: make me appear emotionally unstable, delusional, incapable of managing my affairs. Then swoop in with the power of attorney, playing the role of the concerned, responsible daughter-in-law. But something went wrong. Jordan got injured, perhaps during the illicit task, perhaps deliberately silenced afterwards. In his panic, he used the burner phone not to report back but to call for help, instinctively dialing the only contact programmed, "Mom, my number," thus inadvertently exposing the entire scheme. It was still a theory, but it was now a theory supported by a growing body of evidence. The warehouse ownership, the permits, the environmental violations, Jordan's prior connection to the Devereaux, his presence and injuries at the specific location, the targeted cruelty of the phone number choice, Simone's escalating competence attacks, her push for power of attorney. The archivist in me was satisfied. I had reconstructed the narrative. I had uncovered the likely truth. Now, the principal in me needed to decide how to act on it, how to deliver the consequences, how to ensure justice was served, not just for me but potentially for Jordan and perhaps finally for Michael. My theory felt solid, the narrative compelling, but it lacked one crucial element: direct, irrefutable proof linking Simone to the orchestration of the call and Jordan's subsequent endangerment. Jordan Miller himself was the key, the living witness, but approaching him directly remained too risky. Simone, undoubtedly paranoid now after my refusal to sign the POA, might have him watched. My visit could put him in further danger, or worse, allow Simone to silence him permanently. I needed a way to get his story safely and credibly. My mind immediately went to Mr. Abernathy, my lawyer. He had resources, investigators, ways of operating within the legal system that I did not. I called him, outlining my theory, presenting the evidence I had gathered: Jordan's prior lawsuit against the Devereaux subsidiary, the Apex Solutions connection, the timing, the location, the motive. Abernathy listened patiently, his sharp legal mind processing the implications. "It's a strong circumstantial case, Martha," he said when I finished. "But you're right, we need Miller's testimony to make it airtight, especially if we intend to pursue criminal charges against Mrs. Dubois or her associates." "But how do we get it without alerting Simone?" I asked. "I'm afraid for his safety." "Leave that to me," Abernathy replied, a note of quiet confidence in his voice. I have contacts within the hospital system, and I know just the investigator for this kind of sensitive witness interview. We'll approach him discreetly, offer him full legal protection and support in exchange for his cooperation. We'll ensure his statement is taken formally, documented, sworn, and kept under seal until the opportune moment. True to his word, Abernathy moved quickly. 2 days later he called me back. "We have it, Martha," he said, his voice grim but satisfied. "Jordan Miller is scared, but he's talking. Your theory was remarkably accurate." He proceeded to relay the details, confirming my suspicions with chilling precision. Jordan had been hired by an intermediary, matching the description of Simone's cousin, acting on behalf of unnamed clients. The job was twofold. First, to make the specific scripted phone call to me from the provided burner phone, mentioning Warehouse 7, pretending to be hurt and confused. Second, he was tasked with moving several suspicious, unlabeled barrels from one hidden section of Warehouse 7 to another, late at night, presumably related to the hazardous waste cover-up. During the barrel-moving task, Jordan had slipped on a patch of unseen chemical sludge, falling heavily and hitting his head, fracturing his wrist. His handler from Apex Solutions, who was overseeing the operation from a distance, saw the fall. Instead of rendering aid, the handler panicked, realizing an injured witness was a liability. He struck Jordan again, hard to ensure his silence, then dragged his unconscious body to the small office upstairs, locking him in, planning perhaps to deal with him later more permanently. But Jordan regained consciousness hours later, confused, terrified, alone in the dark. He found the burner phone still in his pocket. In his delirium and pain, remembering the mom contact he was supposed to call for the scare tactic, he hit the button, making that desperate, genuine plea for help. The call drained the last of the phone's battery. He huddled in the corner, drifting in and out of consciousness until the anonymous tip, likely from the handler, trying to dispose of the problem without committing outright murder, led the EMTs to his location. Jordan, now safe under hospital care and offered legal protection by Abernathy's firm, was willing to testify. He provided a detailed description of the intermediary, the Apex handler, the instructions he received, the nature of the barrels he was moving. He even remembered seeing Simone's brother Robert Devereaux briefly at the warehouse site earlier that evening, overseeing the operation. It was the smoking gun. Abernathy had Jordan's sworn affidavit, legally documented, detailing Simone's conspiracy, her family's likely illegal dumping activity, and the potentially criminal actions of Apex Solutions. The trap was no longer just theoretical. It was real. It was armed, and Simone Dubois was walking right into it, utterly oblivious, still believing she was the one in control, still focused on her petty grievance about my competence, unaware that her entire world was about to be detonated by the testimony of the very pawn she had so carelessly, so cruelly tried to discard. My quiet investigation, my refusal to accept their lies, had not only uncovered the truth but had potentially saved a young man's life and exposed a far larger criminal conspiracy. Justice, it seemed, was finally truly within reach. With Jordan Miller's sworn affidavit securely in Abernathy's possession, the full ugly picture of Simone's scheme was complete. It wasn't just about controlling my finances, it was potentially about silencing me regarding her family's illegal activities at Warehouse 7. Using the phone call as both a psychological weapon and a tool to discredit me should I ever raise concerns. Jordan was a disposable pawn in their dangerous game, callously endangered and abandoned when he became inconvenient. The sheer cold-blooded ruthlessness of it all solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. This was about potential criminal activity, environmental hazards, and a profound lack of basic human decency that demanded exposure. My counter-offensive needed to be executed flawlessly. Direct confrontation was still out of the question. Simone would simply deny, lawyer up, and potentially intimidate Jordan into silence. No, I needed to turn their own tactics, their own assumptions, their own arrogance, against them. I needed them to walk willingly into a trap of their own making, a trap baited with their deepest desire, control over me and my assets. My strategy remained the same, but now, armed with the certainty of Jordan's testimony, I embraced the role of the frail, confused, easily manipulated victim with renewed, almost theatrical commitment. I leaned into the performance, becoming the very caricature they wished me to be. I began calling David multiple times a day, my voice deliberately quavering, asking repetitive questions about simple things: the date, the time, whether he thought I should take my vitamins before or after breakfast. I feigned confusion over basic household tasks, accidentally leaving the stove burner on low under close supervision of course, misplacing my purse, which I had hidden myself, expressing exaggerated anxiety about paying my bills online. To Simone, I became increasingly differential, almost childlike in my apparent dependence. "Oh Simone, dear," I'd sigh, clutching my head as if overwhelmed, "I just don't know how you manage everything so effortlessly. My mind feels so foggy these days. Maybe you were right. Maybe managing my finances is getting to be too much for me." I deliberately let them overhear me having a confused phone conversation with my bank, actually talking to a dial tone, asking questions about imaginary missing deposits or unauthorized withdrawals. I made sure they saw me struggling with the online banking portal on my laptop, sighing in frustration, pretending to be utterly baffled by the technology. It was a demeaning performance, grating against every fiber of my competent independent nature, but it was necessary. I needed them to believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that their campaign of psychological warfare had succeeded, that I was broken, that I was frightened, that I was finally, gratefully, ready to surrender control. Their reaction was predictable, and sickeningly triumphant. Simone's earlier frustration vanished, replaced by a cloying, condescending sweetness. She started treating me with the solicitous, patronizing care one might reserve for a particularly fragile valuable antique, or a golden goose about to lay a very large egg. She'd bring me herbal tea, pat my hand reassuringly, offer to help me balance my perfectly balanced checkbook. David, relieved that the problem of his difficult, resistant mother seemed to be resolving itself, became almost jovial, showering me with forced compliments and expressions of loving concern that rang utterly hollow. They were practically vibrating with suppressed excitement, convinced their victory was imminent. Finally, after a week of my carefully calibrated performance of escalating incompetence, Simone made her move again. She approached me one afternoon, her face arranged in an expression of gentle, loving gravity. "Mom Brenda," she began, her voice soft, soothing. "David and I have been talking and we really think for your own peace of mind, we should revisit that idea of the power of attorney. Not because we want to control anything," she added quickly, preempting any flicker of resistance, "but just so we can help you, take that burden off your shoulders, make sure everything is handled smoothly, efficiently. We found that lovely advisor, Mr. Davenport. Remember, he's available to come by tomorrow afternoon, just to chat, answer any questions you might have. No pressure at all." I looked up at her, summoning my most convincing expression of weary, grateful resignation. I let out a long, shaky sigh. "Oh, Simone," I whispered, allowing a tear reel, this time fueled by a mixture of grief, anger and the sheer exhausting effort of the performance, to tremble on my lower eyelid. Maybe you're right. It's all just become so overwhelming since George passed. Maybe it would be best, if you and David are willing." Simone's eyes lit up with a barely concealed predatory gleam. She had done it. She had broken me. Victory was hers. "Of course we're willing, Mom Brenda," she gushed, enveloping me in a brief, cool hug that felt like a snake coiling. "We love you. We just want what's best for you. Tomorrow afternoon it is, then. 2 o'clock, wonderful. You just relax, we'll handle everything from here." She practically skipped out of the room, already reaching for her phone, likely to confirm the appointment with Mr. Davenport and perhaps to celebrate her impending triumph with her equally clueless husband. The hook was set. The bait was taken. They believed with absolute arrogant certainty that they were walking into a simple signing ceremony, the final, formal step in their successful acquisition of my life. They had no idea they were actually walking directly into the meticulously prepared, evidence-laden, legally fortified ambush I had so carefully arranged. The archivist had gathered the documents. The principal was about to deliver the final, public expulsion. The meeting was scheduled, as predicted, for Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, in the formal, rarely used living room of David and Simone's house. The choice of venue was deliberate. I knew, keeping me on their turf, surrounded by their expensive, intimidating environment, reinforcing their sense of control, their perceived dominance in the situation. I spent the morning preparing, not by reviewing my finances, which were securely managed by Arthur Bell far beyond their reach, but by steeling my nerves, mentally rehearsing my lines, ensuring the small, high-fidelity digital audio recorder hidden in the lining of my handbag was fully charged and operational. Every word spoken in that room, every nuance of their manipulative persuasion, every potentially incriminating statement, would be captured. Evidence is everything. I dressed carefully for the role, selecting an outfit that screamed vulnerable, slightly confused, but trying her best. A simple, slightly dated floral print dress that hung loosely on my frame. Comfortable, almost orthopedic-looking low-heeled shoes. My reading glasses perched slightly crookedly on my nose. I deliberately mussed my hair, letting a few gray strands escape the otherwise neat bun. I even applied a touch of pale powder to my face, enhancing the illusion of frailty, of being worn down by worry and grief. I was the perfect picture of the sweet, slightly befuddled, easily guided elderly mother, ready, perhaps even grateful, to hand over the reins of her complicated life. David arrived at my bungalow precisely at 1:30 p.m. to collect me, his manner overly solicitous, almost suffocatingly attentive. A performance clearly orchestrated by Simone. "You okay, Mom? Looking a little tired. Need help with the steps? Can I get you some water before we go? Don't want you getting dehydrated." He was playing his part, the dutiful, concerned son, but his anxiety vibrated just beneath the surface like a faulty electrical current. He clearly wanted this transaction over with as quickly, smoothly, and uneventfully as possible. When we arrived at their palatial house exactly 10 minutes before the appointed hour, punctuality being crucial for Simone's sense of order, she greeted me at the door not with a hug this time, but with a brisk, almost businesslike efficiency masked by a bright, brittle smile. "Mom, Brenda, you made it. Wonderful. Perfect timing. Mr. Davenport is already here, all set up and waiting for you in the living room. He's absolutely lovely. Such a kind man, you'll feel so comfortable with him immediately." She was selling him like she sold overpriced real estate, emphasizing his non-threatening demeanor. Mr. Davenport, the designated financial advisor, the facilitator of the asset transfer. He stood politely as I entered the living room, a large, cold, formal space dominated by white furniture and abstract art that looked angry. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in an impeccably tailored, reassuringly conservative pinstripe suit, radiating an aura of smooth, trustworthy, almost avuncular competence. He had kind eyes, a warm, professionally reassuring smile, and a gentle handshake, all likely carefully chosen by Simone precisely for their ability to inspire confidence and disarm suspicion in someone like me. He was, I suspected, nothing more than a glorified notary public, or perhaps a junior associate from her family's preferred law firm, well briefed on his role. Handle the signing smoothly, quickly, and with minimal explanation of the actual legal ramifications. "Mrs. Dubois," he said, his voice calm, soothing, resonant, the kind used to reassure nervous clients. "A genuine pleasure to meet you. Simone and David have told me so much about you, lies, undoubtedly, about your wisdom, your resilience, and your admirable desire to simplify your financial affairs for greater peace of mind in your retirement." His flattery was as smooth and empty as Simone's smile. They ushered me with exaggerated care to the most comfortable armchair in the room, a large plush velvet monstrosity that swallowed me whole. Simone plumped the cushions behind me, solicitously. David hovered nearby, offering me tea. "Herbal, Mom? Definitely no caffeine for you today, right? Don't want you getting jittery." The performance of solicitous, almost infantilizing care was reaching comical levels of intensity. They were treating me like a fragile piece of antique china about to be signed over to a museum, handling me with kid gloves right before they planned to permanently encase me behind glass. Simone took her position opposite me, perched elegantly on the edge of the pristine white sofa, a thick sheaf of official-looking legal documents held casually but possessively in her lap. David continued to hover nervously near the massive, unlit fireplace, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Mr. Davenport took the seat beside Simone, placing his own slim leather briefcase on the floor beside him. The stage was set, the actors were in position. "Well, shall we begin?" Simone asked brightly, her smile radiating a triumphant yet carefully controlled warmth. "No need to drag this out. Mr. Davenport has drawn up some fairly standard documents, just boilerplate language really, designed to help streamline things for you going forward. Mom, Brenda. Primarily the durable power of attorney for your finances, and also a healthcare directive, just appointing David and me as your agents. Standard practice. It simply ensures that we can step in seamlessly and help manage things if it ever becomes necessary down the line due to health or other circumstances. Honestly, it just takes all the potential worry and burden completely off your shoulders, knowing everything is already taken care of by people you trust." Mr. Davenport nodded reassuringly, playing his supporting role perfectly. "Exactly right," he murmured soothingly. Standard procedure for prudent, responsible future planning. These documents simply designate your chosen trusted family members to act legally on your behalf, ensuring your specific wishes are followed precisely and, most importantly, that your assets are fully protected according to your directives. Protected from whom, exactly? I thought again, the irony thick enough to choke on. Protected from me, or protected for Simone? Simone pulled out the top document, the thick, intimidatingly worded durable power of attorney, and placed it carefully on the glass coffee table directly in front of me, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Beside it she placed an expensive-looking heavy gold-plated fountain pen. "So if you're comfortable, Mom Brenda," she said, her voice soft now, encouraging, almost hypnotic, "and please only if you feel completely ready. You just need to sign right here on the highlighted line. Mr. Davenport and I can witness it for you. Nice and simple, quick and painless." She slid the heavy gold pen slowly across the glass table towards me. Her eyes fixed on my face held a mixture of eager, almost feverish anticipation and a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of cold, predatory triumph. This was it, the culmination of her entire manipulative campaign. The moment she gained legal control over everything I possessed, she thought she had won. She believed, with absolute, arrogant certainty, that the frail, confused old woman before her was about to sign away her life. I looked down at the document, at the dense blocks of impenetrable legal text swimming slightly before my eyes. I deliberately squinted, enhancing the illusion of failing eyesight and mental fog. I reached out a hand, letting it tremble slightly, a touch of genuine nerves perhaps, amplified for dramatic effect, and picked up the heavy, cold fountain pen. I uncapped it slowly, deliberately, the small click echoing in the suddenly silent room. Simone leaned forward almost imperceptibly, holding her breath, her eyes locked on the pen, on my hand. David shifted his weight nervously again, running a hand over his already perfect hair. Miss Davenport watched with the placid professional neutrality of a man simply doing his job, facilitating a standard transaction. My pen hovered over the signature line, the blank space waiting to validate their victory, to seal my fate. The moment stretched thick with anticipation, pregnant with unspoken avarice. And then, exactly on cue, perfectly timed, the doorbell rang, loudly, insistently, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of calm finality. The sharp, insistent chime of the doorbell echoed through the silent, tension-filled living room like a gunshot. Simone jumped visibly, startled, her carefully constructed mask of calm composure shattering instantly. A flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance flashed across her face, quickly followed by anxiety. An unexpected interruption, right at the crucial moment. David looked towards the front door, his expression a mixture of irritation and nervous apprehension. "Were you expecting someone else?" he asked Simone, his voice tight. "No," Simone snapped, recovering quickly though her voice was still strained, regaining control. "Probably just a delivery, ignore it. They'll leave it on the porch." But the doorbell rang again, longer this time, more insistent, almost demanding, followed immediately by a series of firm, authoritative knocks on the heavy front door. This was clearly not a delivery person content to leave a package and retreat. "I'll get rid of them," David muttered, clearly eager for any excuse to escape the charged atmosphere of the room, perhaps also needing a moment to regain his own composure. He hurried out into the foyer, his footsteps quick and uneven on the marble floor. We heard the heavy front door open again, followed this time not by a brief exchange, but by the low, distinct murmur of multiple voices. David's voice, hesitant, confused, perhaps slightly intimidated, and another voice, deeper, calmer, radiating an unmistakable aura of cool, professional authority that cut through David's uncertainty. Then a third voice, female, equally calm, equally professional. A moment later David reappeared in the wide archway leading into the living room. He looked utterly bewildered, almost frightened, like a man who had opened his door expecting a pizza delivery and found the Supreme Court standing on his porch. Behind him stood two figures who were most definitely not delivering pizza, and whose presence immediately irrevocably shifted the power dynamic in the room. The first was Arthur Abernathy, my lawyer, tall, distinguished, impeccably dressed in a conservative, dark gray Savile Row suit that probably cost more than David's entire monthly salary, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression stern, judicial, utterly unreadable. He carried a worn, expensive leather briefcase that I knew contained the meticulously compiled evidence file detailing Simone's entire scheme. He looked like justice itself, arrived to preside over an unexpected trial. Beside him stood a younger woman I didn't immediately recognize, but who radiated the same aura of sharp intelligence and unwavering competence. Likely Sarah Jennings, the fierce associate Abernathy had mentioned, known for her relentless cross-examination skills and her particular enjoyment of dismantling arrogant assumptions. She held a slim digital recorder discreetly in one hand, already switched on, her sharp eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail, the documents on the coffee table, the pen still in my hand, Simone's shocked expression, my deliberately frail posture, with the speed and precision of a crime scene analyst. Simone stared at them, her mouth falling open slightly in stunned disbelief. "Mr. Abernathy," she stammered, recognizing him instantly, not just from old family events but undoubtedly from the city's business journals and society pages, where his name was synonymous with high-stakes litigation and powerful connections. What on earth are you doing here? This is a private meeting." Her voice held a note of rising panic, of indignation warring with fear. Abernathy ignored her completely, his gaze sweeping coolly over the scene, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on the incriminating power of attorney documents displayed so prominently on the coffee table. He assessed the entire tableau in an instant, his expression unchanging. His eyes then met mine briefly, across the suddenly vast extents of the living room. A silent acknowledgement passed between us. "The cavalry has arrived. Precisely on schedule. Proceed as planned." "Martha," he said, his voice calm, clear and authoritative, addressing me directly, cutting cleanly through Simone's sputtering confusion and instantly establishing his role as my representative, my protector. "Apologies for the unannounced intrusion. We came as soon as we received your pre-arranged security alert." He tapped his briefcase significantly. "Are you all right? Are these individuals?" He gestured coolly towards Simone, David, and the increasingly uncomfortable Mr. Davenport, attempting to pressure you in your vulnerable state, to sign legal documents against your will or without full comprehension of their implications. The shift in narrative was instantaneous, breathtaking, stunning. Suddenly, with a few carefully chosen words, I was the potential victim, frail and vulnerable, being rescued from a potentially exploitative situation. And they, Simone, David, even the hapless Mr. Davenport, were the suspicious parties, their motives implicitly questioned, their actions placed under immediate intense legal scrutiny. Simone gasped, genuinely outraged now, scrambling to regain control. "Pressuring her? Of course not. That's outrageous. We were just helping her with some simple financial planning. It was her idea. Mom Brenda asked for our help." Abernathy turned his gaze slowly towards Simone then, his expression arctic, utterly devoid of belief. The quiet ambush was sprung. The counter-trap was activated. The quiet, frail old woman they thought they were so cleverly manipulating had just revealed her own hidden, powerful and impeccably timed legal reinforcements. And their game had just changed, irrevocably, fatally in my favor. The courtroom was now in session. The living room, once Simone's chosen stage for her triumphant acquisition of my autonomy, transformed instantly into an impromptu courtroom, with Arthur Abernathy presiding as the uninvited, but undeniably commanding, judge and prosecutor. His associate, Miss Jennings, stood beside him like a silent, observant clerk, her digital recorder capturing every word, every stammer, every incriminating nuance. "Mrs. Dubois," Abernathy began again, his voice dangerously soft now, focusing his full, intimidating legal sigh on Simone, who visibly flinched under the weight of his gaze. "My client, Dr. Martha Dubois," he again deliberately used my formal title, subtly reinforcing my credentials. "My competence, undermining their narrative of my frailty, has informed me through confidential communications over the past several weeks, of a series of rather disturbing events and manipulative tactics, apparently culminating in this rather opportunistic meeting today." He gestured with barely concealed contempt towards the power of attorney documents still sitting innocently, yet now accusingly on the coffee table between us. "Documents, I might add," he continued, his tone dry as desert sand, "which appear upon initial glance to be hastily drafted, overly broad in the powers they grant, and potentially significantly disadvantageous to Dr. Dubois' long-term financial security and personal autonomy." Mr. Davenport, the supposed kindly advisor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly looking less like a helpful professional and more like an unwitting accomplice caught in the crossfire. Simone found her voice, though it was high-pitched now, thin and trembling with a volatile mixture of defensive rage and raw, undisguised fear. "This is absolutely ridiculous. How dare you barge in here and make these outrageous accusations? My mother-in-law asked for our help. She specifically requested this meeting. She's been confused lately, forgetful. That horrible phone call she received completely rattled her. She desperately tried to cling to the narrative she had so carefully constructed. The narrative of my incompetence." "Ah yes. The phone call," Abernathy interrupted smoothly, seizing on the opening she had unwittingly provided. "The deeply distressing call received at 1:17 a.m., purportedly from her deceased son Michael's number. The call featuring a young man identifying himself as Jordan, claiming to be injured, disoriented, and trapped in Warehouse 7 down by the old shipyard." Simone's eyes widened in pure unadulterated panic. How could he possibly know the details? The name, the location. "A location," Abernathy continued relentlessly, his voice like ice, each word a precisely aimed blow, "which through a curious coincidence, happens to be legally owned by DC Waterfront Holdings 7, an LLC whose registered agent is your brother Robert Devereaux, and which is ultimately controlled by your family's corporation. An LLC, I might add, for which permits for pre-demolition site clearance and highly questionable asbestos abatement were recently and perhaps irregularly expedited by the City Planning Commission." He paused, letting the toxic implications of that information, illegal dumping, hazardous waste cover-up, hang heavy and poisonous in the suddenly still air. David looked physically ill now, leaning heavily against the fireplace mantel for support, finally understanding the potential scope of the disaster his wife had potentially dragged them into. "Imagine our collective surprise, Mrs. Dubois," Abernathy went on, his tone dripping with sarcasm, when, following Dr. Dubois' own prompt 911 call reporting the incident, a call interestingly enough placed after her own son and daughter-in-law explicitly, repeatedly discouraged her from contacting the authorities, dismissing it as a prank, city police discovered a young man matching Jordan's general description, suffering from a moderate concussion, a fractured wrist, dehydration and exposure in the immediate vicinity of that very same Warehouse 7. He deliberately opened his worn leather briefcase then, creating a moment of dramatic tension. He pulled out a thin, neatly bound file. "This," he said, holding up the document so Simone could clearly see the official hospital letterhead on the cover page, "is a certified copy of the admission record for a Mr. Jordan T. Miller, currently recovering quite nicely. I'm pleased to report under observation at St. Jude's Hospital." He then produced a second document, thicker this time, bound in blue legal backing. "And this," he continued, his voice hardening, "is a detailed sworn and notarized affidavit from Mr. Miller himself, obtained by my investigator just yesterday. In it he recounts, in considerable detail, how he was allegedly hired several weeks ago by an intermediary, a gentleman whose physical description and vehicle registration strongly match those of your cousin Mrs. Dubois, for a sum of $500 cash to perform a specific task, make a deliberately distressing and confusing phone call to an elderly woman, using a provided burner phone which was pre-programmed with a specific emotionally charged number. He was instructed to mention Warehouse 7, feign injury and disorientation, and repeatedly refer to the recipient as Mom." Abernathy paused again, his eyes locking onto Simone's now ashen face. "Mr. Miller further testifies," he went on, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more chilling, "that after making the call he was supposed to perform a secondary task involving the relocation of several unmarked barrels within the warehouse. During this task he unfortunately slipped on an unidentified substance, fell, struck his head and fractured his wrist. His handler, an individual he describes as working for a security firm often contracted by your family's company, possibly Apex Solutions, witnessed the fall. Instead of rendering aid, however, this handler apparently panicked, struck Mr. Miller again to ensure his silence, dragged his unconscious body to a small office on the upper level, locked him inside and abandoned him. Miss Miller believes he would likely have succumbed to his injuries or exposure had the police not arrived, alerted by Dr. Dubois' call. He let the full horror of Jordan's testimony settle in the suffocating silence. "Fraud," Abernathy stated calmly, ticking off the potential charges on his fingers. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, potentially unlawful imprisonment and aggravated assault, possibly even attempted murder depending on the handler's full culpability and Mr. Miller's final medical prognosis. And that's just regarding the scheme against Dr. Dubois. We haven't even begun to delve into the potential environmental crimes and labor violations connected to Warehouse 7 itself. He placed Jordan's damning affidavit deliberately, almost ceremoniously on top of the power of attorney documents Simone had placed so hopefully on the coffee table just minutes before. Checkmate. Irrevocable. Absolute. It was then, and only then, that I finally dropped my own performance. The mask of the frail, confused victim dissolved. I sat up straighter in the plush velvet armchair, the illusion of weakness vanishing completely. I took off my reading glasses slowly, deliberately folding them and placing them in my lap. I met Simone's terrified, hate-filled gaze directly across the room. My voice when I finally spoke was no longer the hesitant, trembling whisper of the woman she thought she had broken. It was the clear, strong, unwavering voice of the woman who had run a school, managed countless crises, raised a son, buried a husband and built a life, the woman they had so foolishly, so catastrophically underestimated. I knew Simone, I said quietly, letting the simple, devastating truth land with its full, crushing weight. From the moment David dismissed the call with rehearsed lines. From the moment you started finding my misplaced keys like a bad magician performing cheap tricks. I knew it was a game, your game. I paused, allowing myself a small cold smile. I simply decided, in my retirement, that I had the time, and now the resources to play it better. Simone's carefully constructed world, her entire identity built on a foundation of lies, manipulation and the desperate, relentless pursuit of status she didn't deserve, collapsed completely, utterly, silently in that moment. She didn't scream, she didn't rage, she didn't even sob anymore. She simply crumpled, folding in on herself on the expensive white sofa like a discarded marionette, whose strings had just been decisively, permanently cut, silent tears of pure, unadulterated shame and terror streaming down her face, pooling unnoticed on the pristine fabric. David stared at his wife, then at me, then back at his ruined wife. His face a mask of dawning, horrified comprehension. He finally, truly, devastatingly saw the woman he had married, the woman he had blindly enabled, the woman whose ruthless ambition had just led them both not to the pinnacle of success, but to the very brink of utter public legal ruin. The silence in the room was absolute then, broken only by Simone's quiet, racking, hopeless sobs. The archivist had presented her irrefutable evidence. The case was definitively, damningly closed. The air in the living room was thick, almost unbreathable, saturated with the wreckage of Simone's ambition and David's complicity. Simone remained huddled on the sofa, a portrait of utter disintegration, her quiet sobs the only sound in the vast, opulent room. David stood frozen by the fireplace, looking utterly lost, caught helplessly between the horrifying reality of his wife's calculated cruelty and the undeniable truth of his own profound, passive failure. Mr. Davenport, the unfortunate notary turned witness, looked like he desperately wished the floor would swallow him whole, frantically trying to melt into the expensive upholstery of his chair. Arthur Abernathy, ever the consummate professional, stepped smoothly into the void, taking charge of the denouement with quiet, decisive authority. Mr. Dubois, he said, addressing David directly, his voice calm but firm, leaving no room for argument, given the extremely serious nature of the evidence presented today and the clear potential for significant legal repercussions for your wife, including possible criminal charges, I would strongly unequivocally advise you both to retain separate independent legal counsel immediately. My firm, naturally, represents Dr. Dubois exclusively and vigorously in this matter. He placed his embossed business card deliberately on the coffee table, a tangible symbol of the legal storm about to break. He then turned his cool, appraising gaze towards Mr. Davenport. And you, sir, he continued, his tone hardening slightly, given your presence here and your role in facilitating the attempted execution of these potentially fraudulent documents, I trust you will cooperate fully and truthfully with any subsequent investigation conducted by my office, the district attorney or any other relevant authorities regarding the precise nature of your instructions, your financial advisory services and your relationship with Mrs. Simone Dubois and the Devereaux Corporation. Davenport nodded mutely, sweating profusely now, clearly terrified of being implicated further. Satisfied, Abernathy turned back to me, his stern professional expression softening instantly into one of gentle, almost paternal concern. Martha, he said quietly, offering me his arm. I believe our primary work here is concluded for today. The necessary legal processes are now in motion. Shall we? I stood up, feeling strangely light, almost weightless, as if a physical burden I hadn't even fully acknowledged had just been lifted from my shoulders. The grief for Michael was still there, a deep resonant ache. The sadness for David's weakness, for the daughter-in-law I might have had, lingered, but the immediate suffocating weight of their manipulation, their disrespect, their relentless campaign to erase me, that was gone, replaced by a profound, almost serene sense of closure, of justice beginning its slow, inexorable course. I looked across the room at David, my son. His face was a mask of raw shame and utter confusion. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor, trapped in the wreckage of his own making. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking, thick with unshed tears. I swear I didn't know. I suspected something wasn't right. But I never thought she would." His words trailed off, incoherent, useless. "Didn't you, David?" I asked quietly, not with anger anymore but with a deep, weary, almost clinical sadness. "Or did you simply choose not to know? Did you choose not to see what was right in front of you because confronting it was too difficult, too inconvenient, too threatening to your comfortable life?" He had no answer. Of course. He simply looked down at the ridiculously expensive Persian rug beneath his feet, unable or perhaps unwilling to face the hard, ugly truth of his own weakness, his own failure to protect me, his own silent complicity in Simone's cruel scheme. I didn't wait for an apology. I knew he wasn't yet capable of giving sincerely, an apology that likely wouldn't even begin to form until he fully grasped the extent of the legal and financial catastrophe Simone had unleashed upon them both. I simply nodded once to Mr. Abernathy and his sharp-eyed associate, took Arthur's offered arm, and together we walked out of the house. We walked out of the cold, sterile monument to their ambition, leaving David and Simone alone amidst the silent, glittering ruins of their carefully constructed, utterly fraudulent life. The legal consequences for Simone, Abernathy assured me later, would be significant, though likely complex to navigate, given her family's resources and connections. Fraud, conspiracy, potentially charges related to Jordan's endangerment and false imprisonment, depending on his willingness to press charges and the DA's appetite for a difficult case. At the very least, her reputation, the currency she valued above all else, was irrevocably destroyed within the circles that mattered to her. The Devereaux Corporation's questionable business practices, particularly concerning the shipyard properties and the potential environmental crimes, would also likely face renewed, unwelcome scrutiny from city regulators and environmental agencies, thanks to the information Abernathy's investigators had discreetly passed along. Whether David would ultimately choose to stand by her through the inevitable legal battles and social ostracization, whether their marriage, built on such shaky foundations of mutual convenience and shared ambition, could possibly survive such a catastrophic betrayal and public disgrace, remained to be seen. That was his choice to make now, his consequence to bear, his mess to navigate. My involvement in their lives, beyond ensuring justice was pursued for Jordan, was definitively over. My focus now, finally, was entirely on securing my own future, ensuring my peace and my substantial assets were protected beyond any doubt, beyond any possibility of future claims or manipulations. With Abernathy's expert guidance, I restructured my finances immediately, placing everything into a series of more complex ironclad trusts with carefully worded stipulations regarding beneficiaries and control, ensuring neither David nor Simone could ever gain access, now or in the future, through inheritance. The lines were drawn, legally and permanently. I also made sure through Abernathy that Jordan Miller received the best possible legal protection, counseling for his trauma and significant financial support for his recovery and his future education, all funded anonymously through one of my established charitable accounts. He was a victim in this, a pawn used and discarded. He deserved a chance to rebuild his life. A chance someone, Simone, her family, their associates had tried so carelessly, so cruelly to take from him. Providing that chance felt like the only truly clean, truly right action to emerge from this entire sordid affair. And then, with all the legal and financial safeguards firmly in place, I made one final decision for myself. I couldn't stay in my old bungalow, much as I loved it. It held too many ghosts now. Too many painful memories. Both of Michael's absence and of Simone's recent betrayal. I needed a fresh start. A true sanctuary. A place untainted by the past. A place that was purely, unequivocally mine, using a small fraction of my quietly accumulated, now fully secured wealth. I bought a beautiful, light-filled, two-bedroom condominium in a quiet, elegant building downtown, overlooking the river, just a few blocks from the museum where I felt most at peace, and close to the main branch of the public library. the places that felt like my true spiritual home. The story ends not with a dramatic confrontation, not with tearful apologies or forced reconciliations, but with quiet, earned peace. Months later, perhaps a year, I am sitting on the balcony of my new condo on a bright spring morning. The city skyline glitters across the river, the water flows steadily, peacefully towards the distant sea. The air is fresh, carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms from the park below. I am sipping my morning tea, reading a newly acquired fascinating biography, completely engrossed. My phone rings, my new phone, with its new private, carefully guarded number. It's the director of the youth shelter I've increased my donations to, calling with an update. Jordan Miller, he tells me, has successfully completed his GED program with honors and has just been accepted into a community college program for computer technology. He's working part-time, living independently, and seems to be thriving. A small victory, a fragile, precious piece of hope salvaged from the wreckage. I hang up, a genuine quiet smile touching my lips. I look down at the small framed photo on the table beside my comfortable chair. It's Michael, age 19, grinning that infectious, slightly rebellious grin, his saxophone glinting in the sunlight. The deep familiar ache of his loss is still there, a permanent resident in the landscape of my heart. But it's different now. The anger has softened, the gnawing unanswered questions have finally been laid to rest, replaced by the harsh, painful but ultimately clarifying light of truth. Knowing what truly happened, however ugly, has brought a strange, unexpected, almost peaceful kind of closure. Simone's cruel, manipulative scheme, intended to exploit my grief and break my spirit, had inadvertently, ironically, led me to a form of resolution I never thought possible. I didn't get the loud, public theatrical revenge of seeing Simone dragged away in handcuffs or David groveling at my feet, though Abernathy assures me the legal consequences for her are slowly, surely grinding forward. But I got something far more valuable, far more lasting. I protected myself, I secured my hard-earned freedom, I found the difficult truth, and in the process I reaffirmed my own quiet strength, my own competence, my own unshakable power, not with shouting or threats or displays of wealth, but with the meticulous, undeniable evidence gathered by an archivist who refused, absolutely refused, to let her own history, her own present, her own future be rewritten, devalued, or controlled by those who sought to exploit her grief and underestimate her resilience. I had honored Michael's memory, not by dwelling endlessly in the darkness of the past, but by finally fully stepping into the light and claiming my own future. And in the quiet hum of my new life, surrounded by books and beauty and the gentle flow of the river, that felt like the most profound, most complete, most satisfying victory of all.